I would like to start our webinar series linked to this exhibition, Hong Kong Horizontal Metropolis, a Paradigm Shift. First of all, I would like to thank the curatorial team, Gianni Talamini, Christine Kaiser, myself, and the co-curator Yutong Zhang. Special thanks go to the curatorial advisory board, especially to Paola Viganò, chief curator, conceptualizer, and initiator, Chiara Cavalieri, Martina Barcelloni Corte, e Chini Sa. A personal thanks go to Margaret Chan for her enthusiasm and trust in this subject since our first meeting, to the Hong Kong Institute of Urban Design, which we also thank, and the Hong Kong Institute of Landscape Architects, and the Indra and Harry Banga Gallery at the City University of Hong Kong for their support and collaboration. A very special thanks goes to the International Forum of Urbanism, aimed to strengthen the international collaboration in the field of urbanism, in particular to the president of IFOU, Wang Chu Yuan Vivian, the chairman, Professor Michael Van Dorst, and to the general director, Dr. Zhang Ye, to mention a few. We collaborated all together from different parts of the world to overcome the difficulties brought by the COVID-19 pandemic and to bring to completion this exhibition. The purpose of the webinars, which will accompany the exhibition every Saturday at 11, 18, 25th, and Sunday, 26th of September, is to discuss underway landscape transformation to theoretically grounded interdisciplinary approaches, combining comparative case scenarios in the Greater Bay Area and abroad, spanning from Europe to Southeast Asia. On each day, we will have two sessions covering one of the three main themes: radical ecology, symbiotic urbanism, and territory. To better discuss the contents of each of our sessions, to briefly introduce them, radical ecology critically inquires established socioeconomic paradigms to propose novel approaches and values to respond to the impelling environmental crisis. In the first session, we will be particularly focused on cultural ecology to attempt to explain similarities and differences in culture in relation to the environment, and as well historical and formative aspects of Hong Kong landscape, the River Delta, and the heritage of Guangdong cultural landscape will be presented. The second session will mainly deal with the relationship between agriculture and architecture and possible future scenarios, from rooftop farming to agricultural tradition in the Delta. Secondly, the session Symbiotic Urbanism will investigate the symbiotic interrelation of a social, economic, and ecological system that contribute to the endogenous anthropogenic shaping of the landscape. This session will present tangible case studies through the Rural Urban Framework project in the Chinese countryside, demonstration of how the countryside regenerates the paths for ecological transition in the European context, and of course in the Greater Bay region. And finally, an in-depth study of the Hangzhou case study exhibited in the exhibition. The evening session will deal with the emerging public realm of the Greater Bay Area and will address theoretical and practical possibilities for discussing space in the context of a mega regional development in China. Subsequently, the metabolism of model and theoretical figure from the field of architecture and urban planning, mixed in the rapid urbanization of China in the last 30 years, will represent a potential starting for questioning the possible emergence of a new symbiotic reformulation of the horizontal metropolis. The territory session, which is the last one, will explore the conceptual and spatial notion of the territory, either as the mental construct that influences its processes of creation and erasure, or as a multi-layered support for understanding its contemporary urban dimension and environmental and biotic entanglement. In the first session, we outlined the necessity for comprehending liminal urbanism and urban heterogeneity as constituent factor for dynamic urban and ecologic development, followed by practical example in the region and in the Chinese countryside, flanked by a broader reflection on the relationship between the political and biological dimension of the territory. The second one will offer a vast review of case studies and intervention, ranging from the analysis of agropolitan system to the intervention of ecological restoration of the Turenscape to those of historical conservation of a node office, side by side in comparison with European case studies. The concluding session of 26th of September will present publication of horizontal Metropolis and possible direction for further studies. Finally, an absolute thanks goes to the panelists and the audience. Without their enthusiasm and involvement, this webinar would not have been possible. I would like now, before leaving the floor to Gianni Talamini and subsequently to Paola Viganò and his Lectio Magistralis entitled The Horizontal Metropolis, a Radical Project, I would like to introduce the panelists that we have today in this roundtable discussion. Perhaps briefly in introduction. Paola Viganò, who is an architect and urbanist, professor in urban theory and urban design at EPFL in Lausanne, where she heads the Lab EU and the new interdisciplinary habitat research center. She is also professor at UAV University in Venice and guest professor in several international schools. In 2013, she received the Grand Prix de l'Urbanisme in France. In 2016, the title of Doctor Honoris Causa by the UCL. In 2017, the Flemish Culture Award for Architecture, Ultima Architecture. And in 2018, the Golden Medal to the career of Milano Triennale. From 1990 to 2014, together with Bernardo Secchi, she was in charge of a studio, working on numerous urban projects in Europe. And since 2015, StudioPaolaViganò has been working on urban landscape projects and public space in Europe and has won several international competitions, including recently the competition for the Lectio lakefront, the design of 2 large-scale ring parks on the future capping of the highway in Antwerp, and the master plan for Post-West in Charleroi in France. Another panelist is Mathieu Berger, professor of sociology in UCLouvain, where he teaches urban sociology, theory of public space, social semiotics, and qualitative research methods. He is a research fellow at CRIDEIS, Centre de Recherche Interdisciplinaire Démocratie, Institutions, Subjectivité, and a research affiliate at École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, especially at the lab CEMS, Centre d'études des mouvements sociaux, and at EPFL Lausanne. His research deals on the hand with democratic public spaces and political participation, and on the other, with social aspects of city planning and urban policies in Europe and the US. Mathieu is also the general coordinator of the Metrolab UCLouvain ULB, a laboratory of applied urban research based in Brussels and funded by European Regional Development Fund. Kelly Shannon teaches urbanism at Leuven, is the program director of the Master of Urban Settlement and Master of Urbanism, Landscape and Planning, and has held teaching positions in Europe, Asia, and United States. Her design research is at the intersection of interpretative mapping, projective cartography, urbanism, and landscape. Her teaching research and practice engage in numerous contexts: Belgium, Estonia, Vietnam, China, Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Kenya, and so on. Primarily in the public sector, focus on the development of robust landscape structures as a form of resilience to deal with the contemporary design challenges at the territorial and urban design scale. She's also co-founder of Research Urbanism and Architecture, RUA, whose projects include the master plan revision of Canton and the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, both approved by the Prime Minister. Professor George Cheslin is a chair professor and head in the Department of Geography, University of Hong Kong. He received his PhD degree in human geography from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, in Canada in 1994. And then an MA in urban geography from University of Akron, Ohio, USA in 1989. MSc at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou in China in 1981. He's also the author of The Red Capitalism in South China, Growth and Development of the Pearl River Delta, and also Developing China, Land Politics and Social Conditions, and over 90 articles published in international referred journals and books. His research includes China urban development and urbanization, land use and land management, diverse pathway of low carbon urbanism, innovation and regional development in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area. He's an elected fellow of the Academy of Social Science of the UK. And finally, we have Joshua Bolchover, which is currently Associate Professor at the University of Hong Kong. His current research focuses on complex urban-rural ecology of cities. He set up rural-urban framework with John Lin in 2005 with the remit to create a not-for-profit agency as a platform for design and research. Their project had been internationally exhibited at the Venice Biennale in 2016, the Design Museum London in 2016, the Chicago Biennale in 2015, and so on. And currently also exhibited in the ongoing Biennale in Venice. Rural Urban Frameworks works has been awarded the RIVA International Emerging Architect Award in 2016 for the Andong Hospital, the Carrie Stone Design Prize 2015, the Ralph Erskine Prize in 2014, and has received the third place commendation for Architectural Review, Healthcare and School Award. Thank you very much for being part in this session. I now leave the floor to Gianni and Paola.
Behind me, and to invite all of you that are in Hong Kong to visit it. It's going to be visitable until the 26th of September this year. So please come. And there are going to be 6 cases. One of them is Hong Kong. And so why Hong Kong, and why Hong Kong as an horizontal metropolis? Everybody's asking us that. And my mind goes back to the oxymoric connection between horizontality and the notion of metropolis, well highlighted by Paola Viganò in her books, as well as by one video as well as to a video that is here on view, in which Bernardo Secchi was mentioning Hong Kong and New York as the iconic images of the 20th century vertical city, in opposition to the horizontal metropolis, in opposition to the notion of horizontality when connected to the idea of a metropolis. Then why? If we look at the Greater Bay Area, if we look at the Pearl River Delta, as it was named, back in 1979, it was looking like that. If we look at the Pearl River Delta in 2003, then the image would be very, very different. You see this incredible amount of urbanization that happened in between all the biggest center that was already in a way developed at that time. And there are a lot of territories that were agricultural and in which new forms of urbanization mix with existing grassroots occupation in a way of these lands. If we look at Hong Kong, we recognize that there are still a big proportion of these particular settlements and particular territories, especially in the new territories and especially in the area of Yonglong, where you have a lot, so the part that you see here in the north, where you have a lot of alluvial deposits and flatland. And these are the lands where agriculture is still possible. And these are the lands where agriculture is now mixing with many other different activities. And is also a new center of new centrality within the Greater Bay Area. So if we look at all this, and if we look at the land use of Hong Kong, we recognize that about 7% is occupied by either rural or rural settlements or agricultural land, and this is make up about 1/5 of the overall urbanized territories of Hong Kong, while around 65% of it is completely natural still. So it's an important part. It's an important occasion for us to discuss about it and to discuss about its future. We look into that with this exhibition, and we look into that by using the protocol that was set by Paola Viganò and the EPFL team that has been working on this idea since several years already. And we analyze a little portion of this territory, which is Limestone Valley, which is a very rich valley in terms of topography, but as well as in terms of culture, where we have about 26 different kind of villages that has many different kind of histories from Aka to Punti, and a mix there together since a very, very long time. It's a land that was looking like that only in 1999, that is nowadays going through our process of continuous, in a way, urbanization, but as well as it keeps a lot of the elements that were there several centuries ago already. That said, we have an entire exhibition dedicated to that, and then I would like to give the floor to Paola, and that will tell us more about the notion of horizontalities. Thank you all, and welcome, Paola.
Thank you, Gianni, and thanks to Andrea, and thanks to everybody for taking the time on Saturday morning or Saturday evening to be together here. So I would like to share my screen. So let's first put the images. No, I'm of course very, very happy of this possibility to rediscuss something that we have been thinking and rethinking and discussing in several occasions in the different moments in which exhibitions were settled on the horizontal metropolis, including the one in Venice, in Lausanne, in Brussels, at the Beaux-Arts, and in Shenzhen, and unfortunately just at the beginning of the COVID, so that exhibition was starting to produce a dialogue with the Shenzhen people and the municipality and community. But of course, the Biennale was closed so early, and it was not possible. And it's very good that Andrea and Gianni took this. Sorry, I think I lost you. Is it true?
Yes.
So let me share again. So I was saying that I would like to go through these two aspects of this work. The one is related to the construction of a discourse, or let's say of a new discourse about urbanization that we contributed together with Bernardo Secchi with these two figures, the figures of isotropy and the figures of horizontality. And then to get more into the space of the horizontal metropolis and to discuss a little bit the different readings, the different interpretations that we constructed in the different parts of the world. For what concerned the discourse, I think the discourse started to be constructed with the understanding of a territory of diffusion, settlement diffusion in the northern of Italy, around Venice. Here you see Venice and the lagoon. So this type of urbanity that was for a lot of time considered just a chaotic mass of hybrid objects, which has constructed a specific landscape, as you see here, and that we tried to interpret not only starting from the built substance, but mainly from the infrastructural layers, the layers that in the long term have constructed this territory, and in particularly from the layer of the roads, of the different types of roads, paths, etc., and of the water. And of course, between roads, let's say asphalt in general, as we said, and water, so water and asphalt, there is a very narrow relation, and we understand that this territory has been constructed in the long term. And the question we have today is this territory able to face the new challenges? This type of city, this diffuse urbanization, is able to tackle the new questions. And the new questions, of course, relate to climate change, relate to also economic transformations, relate to societal issues. If we take the risk related to climate change in the context of the Venice lagoon, we know there are a lot of problems related to the sea level rise, related to the big floodings that might happen. And we understand that this territory has to rework the infrastructures that were related to the protection of people, of activities. But rethink the infrastructures should be directed, that's our hypothesis, not really to the big works that try to solve once forever all the problems, but on the contrary, on this diffuse management and this diffuse valorization of the micro infrastructures that should be read in a systemic way through this section strategy that is very, very important in our work, in our collective work. This systemic approach that connect the different interrelations. For example, you see this type of situation where you have houses, activities spread in the different parts, but always guided by the presence of these structural elements. We were reflecting on isotropy as a quality, something that we can decide if we want to valorize with the projects that will be necessary in the future, or if we want to weaken, if we want to kill it, if we want to fragment. In fact, isotropy is a quite fragile quality of the territory. The idea of having the same conditions in all directions is a very fragile. And I think that the horizontal metropolis touches also on this type of questions. Should we rework, for example, this long-term type of infrastructures and try to understand what is still contemporary, what is still useful in this infrastructure, what is also ecologically interesting in this infrastructure, or we should consider this part of a kind of old-fashioned or archaic, even in some cases, archaic way to solve problems. As you know, the tendency, the modern culture of infrastructure is really taking a very clear direction towards big infrastructures, big works, and not very often there is an attention, which is also an attention to the reading of the territory. Here, for example, we understand that the presence of hundreds of gravel pits distributed in all the dry plain in this area. And we make a scenario in which, by reusing, considering the abandoned gravel pits as a space for water, we can, let's say, diminish the risk for the populations living in this area, and even make a better use of water that can be impartially used for agriculture. So I go very, very quick, but let's say the idea to work on this new type of landscapes that can couple the protection from the flooding, but together with the social space, together also with the economies that are close by, etc. Also, another fundamental aspect in this type of distributed and extended urbanization, mobility is a central topic. And again, the tendency is to introduce very strong and powerful infrastructures that can redirect and reorganize all the rest. We know that these territories, they are very dense in terms of infrastructures, also in relation to mobility, so roads and etc. The choices that were made in the past were, for example, choices that were not reinforcing the public transport, but abandoning railway lines, abandoning tramway lines in favor of the car, not the car transport. And we reread those territories, exploring the possibility to reopen closed railway lines, to reintroduce tramway lines that were completely dismantled, and we made the scenario that we can think to live in such territories without a car. So we developed scenarios of no car in this type of distributed and extended urbanization. Of course, when you imagine this, and we made, say, quite rigorous calculations of the cost, and we worked together with transport engineering. And in fact, this is possible. It's not impossible. The resources are possible if you don't use the car, if you don't buy cars, if you don't construct spaces for cars, you can put this money in the public transport. And you can reuse a lot of infrastructures that are already present. You can also redesign all the space that should be free of cars. Today, cars occupy the public realm, occupy even our home. They take a big part of our space. So to reduce drastically the presence of cars means also to free up spaces that can become spaces for new qualities of space. I'm not going further. There is a book, What Renals for the Project of Isotropy, that is in fact coming to these topics that at the end are touching economic, political, and ecological aspects, where we read the rationality of isotropy from this perspective. There is an economic rationality of isotropy, let's say also the cost of infrastructure. There is a political meaning of isotropy because this idea of distribution is fundamental and equal qualities for everybody. So it's strongly political. And of course, there is, not of course, and surprisingly, there is also an ecological rationality because of this networking, diffuse networking of ecological connections, micro-ecological infrastructures, etc., can be extremely, extremely important. Not to consider the economic also presence of diffuse enterprises, small, medium enterprises that characterize many of these territories. So to start, I would say that the horizontal metropolis that is coming together with this first reflection on isotropy addresses the functional, cultural, and spatial characters of the contemporary urban condition. And when I say contemporary urban condition, this doesn't mean that we don't consider the inertia of territorial structures. Here you see, for example, a small fragment of Flanders and the comparison between maps of the 18th century and today. And you see that you can even still recognize many of these small infrastructures. They are still present today, although all the rest has been transformed, like in the first image, where we are in a big industrial area, in a harbor in Ghent, but still you recognize the settlement, filament, and let's say the parceling, the agriculture is still readable and there. So we work with also with this idea of inertia, of this isotropic condition. The shift to horizontality arrived with a vision for Brussels in 2040, so a kind of a projection, long term, that we realized 10 years ago. Brussels is at the center of one of these very dispersed area, one of the most dispersed area in Europe. And there, the question of horizontality starts to get also another meaning, not just as a lens to look at this type of extended urbanization, but also horizontality as a projection, as a vision, and that nevertheless was influenced by certain characters we found in Brussels. Mathieu Berger, that is here, but also Kelly, that knows very well the region, will probably be less enthusiastic than my presentation. But at the moment in which we were studying Brussels, there was still this very horizontal condition of relations among cities, different parts of the territory. Brussels was not a type of capital like, for example, Paris, very concentrated, with a large periphery around. You see also from these representations that it is a very specific type of metropolitan condition, different also from the Dutch one, with the big fragments isolated in the countryside. So this space was in a way also representing a different type of social, political organization. Today, things are a little bit more nuanced because we are in a moment in which Brussels is really taking all its weight and becoming more and more, let's say, the center, which I think is a tendency that should open to reflections. In any case, this horizontality of relations, this urbanization quite extended, doesn't mean that we are in a homogeneous context. It's very much, let's say, designed by the presence of the three valleys with the three rivers, but is very much integrated and connected by a public transport that is extremely, is very meshed and more meshed, which doesn't create hubs. So there is not this idea that you are obliged to pass in certain places to change and to. On the contrary, there is a fluidity that helps in imagining this horizontality of relations. I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit fast. Of course, there are a lot of questions also in this horizontal, let's say, that we read as a horizontal metropolis, with a vision that wanted to reinforce this idea of horizontal relations among the different parts. We detected, of course, the presence of more social problems in the west part of Brussels. And we proposed a series of projects that were tackling at the same time the question of education, so with the idea of clusters of schools, sport facilities, services that were bringing, let's say, the same qualities related to these aspects in the different part of this periphery, together with working on reinforcing the ecological structure that is related to the presence of the affluent of the main Seine River of the main valley, together with all the biodiversity, the forest, the woods that are going together, but also to rely on the presence of very fertile land. So the most fertile part of Brussels is on the west side. So bringing this agriculture closer to the city and considering also the risk, the flooding risk aspect. So social and mobility, because there is also a mesh of public transport, social mobility and ecological and risk questions connected by an idea, an hypothesis of these Western gardens. Imagining all the west of Brussels as a big metropolitan garden, inhabited garden, where you work at the same time on the risk of flooding, on biodiversity, on education, on public transport, and you restructure, regenerate the city that is there. This detail was important because I think that any long-term vision has to be fed by very concrete spaces or say exploration of space. But this work and this interest on the figure of horizontality brought us to investigate, and here I start with the research that is also exhibited in Hong Kong, to understand a little the genealogy of this horizontality aspect. And the researcher developed this genealogy starting from very simple reading of the debate that was around these different forms of urbanization, the different authors. Again, I'm going to be very, very fast. At the different scales, the European scale, and then enlarging to also the rest of the world, where in fact it's very interesting, the kind of nomadic traveling of ideas on the different part, on the east side, on the west, starting from Europe, of course, and the different forms that this attention to the new type of urbanization was taking. You have in the exhibition the interviews that we did to a series of people. You recognize maybe here Marcel Smets, here with the banlieue radieuse, Terry McGee with this concept of desakota that is being extremely influential in the Southeast Asia. Thomas Sieverts with the idea of Zwischenstadt, so the space in between cities. Francesco Indovina, that was one of the first to formulate this idea of diffuse city in the Italian context. John Friedman, that proposed this agropolitan model. Bernardo Secchi, that was, I think, the first one that tried to convince people that at the European level there was a question that was emerging, and now we tend not to say that this question emerged everywhere. And I leave as the last one Andrea Branzi, because his presence in this group is slightly different, while the previous ones were mainly bringing interpretations starting from concrete situations and projections starting from concrete situations. Let's say Andrea Branzi especially investigated the conceptual level of this horizontality, maybe using different words, but in any case, with this idea of reacting to the modern frame made of very rigid protocols, reopening this rigidity of the modern cage and reflecting on something that has not the same strength, has not the same, is more weak. But we will come back to this aspect of weakness. So then, together with this exploration of the genealogy that is much longer and started from the 18th century with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and then it arrives to the 90s of the last century, then we explored several spaces. First, we wanted to measure those spaces, to understand which are the measures, the relevant measures of this type of urbanization. And for this reason, we organized, together with Chiara Cavalieri, a series of atlases that investigated the space, also in relation to the ideas that were brought. So, for example, this territory is the one on which André Corbeau developed this idea of ville territoire, city territory, that was coming from previous conceptualization made by Manfredo Tafuri at the beginning of the 60s for the Italian territory. Then reading and constructing this series of atlases that I would like to define as atlases of spatial and natural capital. They try to understand what of this type of urbanization can be considered a capital, not just a mistake, not just a waste of resources, but also a capital that can be implemented, can be reused in the future. And the projection, so the horizontal metropolis becoming also a vision, is related to this criticism that the horizontal metropolis brings to vertically, or say hierarchical, territorial organizations, and we are confident that this was the main hypothesis of the research, that spatial design, spatial landscape, design, can really give a contribution to strengthen horizontal relations. Because it works on micro infrastructures, on the coexistence and not on the separation of the different rationalities, it really rely on the spatial hybrids. And it learns from heterogeneous and diffuse urban conditions. But of course, this is not only for the extended urbanization. There is a part of the vision of the horizontal metropolis that is even, larger, or more general, because the horizontal metropolis vision works against the extreme specialization of space, against the creation of centers and peripheries, on new continuities, balanced territorial condition, accessibility, and integration. This is the vision part, okay? So let's say the research is made of one more rigorous investigation, exploration of territories, and a second part where we take also the risk of bringing hypotheses that maybe are not shared. To make this investigation on the metamorphosis that these territories are going through, we needed some other to construct a frame to help. And I think that this one is related to the importance of valorizing the embodied energy that is already there. So what is already there, constructed and realized. The life cycles that invest what is already there. And the question of inclusion that is always present when there is a change, when you go from one cycle to another cycle, from an economic cycle to another cycle. This is a devastating process where people are excluded, new marginalities are created, etc. So we are very interested in looking at territories to this also lens of life cycles and of the layer of the existing, what is already there, and the inclusion that is part of the problem. Also, the no car, so the idea of the shift of the mobility paradigm is very present in our explorations, where we explore the possibility of territories also not, let's say, very high density to work without car. And the section strategy that I showed you before as a kind of systemic approach through the different contexts. So design was a specific tool for this exhibition, where we took as a reference for our protocol the models that were realized by Frank Lloyd Wright and his students, the models of Broadacre City. And we started from those scale dimensions, and we explored different sites. Now I will go through the 4 or 5 situations very, very fast. The Boston metropolitan area, you know, the typical, let's say, edge city condition, where we can nevertheless recognize some territorial figure or spatial figures. At the same time, in interacting with the people, of course, in a series of interviews, where we understand also the weakness of these situations, realizing the models. The models, when I say the models, they were not complete models because the effort was really enormous. So some part are really 3D models, others are drawings, axonometric drawings, but they are very beautiful, also the drawings, where we try to explore this transformation, this metamorphosis. I speak of metamorphosis because it's really growing out of the existing condition, the evolution, for example, of one of the biggest, of the oldest commercial center in the United States, the possibility to use the forest that is more or less everywhere, also as a social space, introducing certain sport activities, rethink the presence of agriculture in the Boston area. Agriculture is very, very scarce. It has been abandoned after, let's say, the discovery of the Great Plains, the great fertile plains in the West. But today there is the need to come back to the local also production of food. So here the idea to reuse all the spaces that are under the big power plants and power lines for this, and making of these new infrastructures that could also design certain new relations among the different parts, working on the densification and transformation of the typological characteristic. This second case is Lausanne. Again, you see the typical hybrid condition of agriculture, industry, housing, a little bit of nature here and there. also understanding the total disconnection that many of the inhabitants of this horizontal metropolis, they have from their territory. There is no geographical understanding of where they are. They are somewhere on a plot. And that's also a problem, because if this horizontal metropolis has to become a space we have to care of course, we need, first of all, to put our feet somewhere and to know where we are. This is a case in which infrastructures are very present and very, say, fragmenting the different parts of the territory. And at the same time, there are potentials because, for example, the presence of rails and the connection between industries and rails is still very, very important. And this is for sure one fundamental aspect for the also ecological transition to reinforce railway mobility and the use for logistics, for industrial logistics. And okay, it's very difficult to enter in all the detail, but to explore also forms of coexistence between production and housing, while connecting, let's say, the big universities that are just close by to this new environment. If I go rapidly to the one alpine valley, that's, I think, important that we remember that also the Alps, also territories that we still consider as non-metropolitan, as kind of idyllic natural conditions, are severely impacted by all the big infrastructures that have been realized in the modern period. The rivers have been completely canalized. Today, there are big problems related to these rigid infrastructures to make productive, to create productive plains that, in fact, they are productive at the same time they are extremely inhabited and impermeabilized. So there is an amount of infrastructures that present a lot of problems. And at the same time, there are some tendencies of people that like to come back to live in these conditions. And so what is the project we have for these places where you are metropolitan because you take your train, you go to the University in Lausanne, you go to Geneva. So the relation between these alpine valleys and the city is very strong, and you cannot imagine here to consider that you are just in an alpine village. No, you are in fact inside a metropolitan area. You have an airport, an abandoned airport in the plain. You have a big infrastructures, highways, railways, the canalization of the Rhone. So there are so many questions that are opened when you start to look close now to these situations where you have to abandon all the images of nature, of leisure. Here we are in productive spaces. The alpine valleys are very productive spaces. Agriculture is marginalized. The big infrastructures are taking all the space, and the infrastructure imagined in a period in which we were thinking that we could tame whatever risk, today show their limits, and then we have to reopen, let's say, these discourses. Okay, again, I'm not describing the solutions or the hypothesis we brought, but just to give you an idea of this variety, but nevertheless of the density that is metropolitan, because here we have metropolitan infrastructures and metropolitan services. At the same time, the small scale of the village and the possibility to integrate an old airport with the village and to work also on the quality of the village itself. The Venice part, maybe I go even faster because I have already spoken of this diffuse city, long-term diffusion constructed on a very old infrastructure realized by the Romans, so some years ago, and this presence of small and medium industries that today are at the same time changing their status, but also reinforcing themselves, so that we are in a moment of rationalization of the system. So we cannot say that this system is in crisis, because in fact is reimagining itself and it's still a presence in this territory. And then, let's say, different ideas about how to deal with it. The Venetian case and the Hangzhou case in China have some strong connection in terms of the role of water, for example, and water management that has really designed all the territory, a territory in which also small and medium enterprises flourished in the past years, at the same time crossing several crises, and then a territory in which you have to work with water, agriculture, and this new urban situation where the densification along certain lines is very present. At the same time, the risk of those territories is just simply to be invaded by the expansion of the big metropolis that are simply making of all this a generic tissue of big scale buildings, without working on the micro infrastructure, without working on this. I think you in the panel we have people that can speak even more directly on these risks. This case, the Hangzhou case, will be also presented by Qini Chang, that realized his PhD on this hypothesis of the horizontal metropolis, investigating Hangzhou area. So the connection, once you have these cases, you can start to make comparisons that are not obvious, where you see similarities, for example, between the Venice and the Chinese case, although with different morphologies, but it's very important. Or you can understand that some elements that we recognize in one case are really quite valid for many other cases. Here you see all the alpine valleys in the big alpine valleys in the mountain range, and the one we were talking about is this. But of course, I can recognize. I come from this valley myself. I can recognize many of the same questions raising in many others of these valleys. And to conclude, so this exploration were an exploration of this metamorphosis, thinking of the transition as a moment of metamorphosis. And I want, of course, to put the name of all the people that have contributed to this work that has invested a lot of students in different parts of the world, and a lot of also researchers and scholars, and that finally is what you see in the exhibition. I would skip this part that was mainly bringing some more recent research and design. Just to conclude on this picture, where the three books that we have dedicated to this research. The first one, The Horizontal Metropolis Between Urbanism and Urbanization, is a collection of positions. We organized a big symposium some years ago, and we really wanted to discuss with other scholars, and the book contains the different positioning and the different hypotheses, the different criticism about this idea. The second book, The Horizontal Metropolis, A Radical Project, is contains the work, also the graphic work that was made together with the students, so the materials I showed you before, and the atlas part, and also the video part, because there was also these interviews and videos of the different territories that were very beautiful. And the third one that is not yet out, we still hope that in 2021 will be out, is the anthology. So it's the one that, in fact, should have been at the beginning, is the genealogy. It will arrive at the end. And for me, it's an important book, because this anthology makes the effort to reveal the line of thought, a kind of continuity we see as a continuity from the 18th century until today, we explore mainly the part between, let's say, the 60s and the 90s of the 20th century, but also with some prophecies, let's say, that were made in the 18th and in the 19th century. And this, I think, is important because it is clearly a kind of parallel thought, parallel to the main line of thought. That's why I used the term of not only of radical project, but also counter-radical project, because this has not been the main line of the discourse, the main line of research, the main line of thought and of design. Still, it is there. And you can recognize that this criticism of some of the fundamental, let's say, concept of our modern, Western modern era were tackled by this line of thought. And among all of them, mainly the idea of hierarchy and the relation between hierarchy and order. So the idea that design should work in putting order somewhere through hierarchy. This has been a fundamental paradigm for all the work that urbanism, architecture, etc., has realized, that we want to show as in a counter position that start from the idea that you can criticize this foundational paradigm. Of course, I'm very curious, also from the eastern side of the world, to understand what is the relation with this paradigm, and if you think that this has been as strong as it has been in the construction of the Western world. This doesn't mean that modernity does not contain anything different. It contains, but the line of thought was a marginal one, was one that was often even forgotten, and in any case was lateral. So it's not a negation, a total negation of modernity I'm proposing here, but is clarifying that inside modernity there is more than just certain, let's say, well-known ideas. I hope that to have put a little bit of questions also for the debate. And I'm looking forward to this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paola, for this interesting and very fascinating presentation. Perhaps now we can continue with the panel discussion. So in the panel, we're supposed to have an informal conversation among the panelists, which are Mathieu Berger, and I apologize for pronouncing your name in English before.
It's better.
In fact, it was quite clear. Kelly Shannon, Professor George Lean, and Joshua Bolchover. Perhaps you already have a few questions to propose, to interact, and enhance the discussion among those topics of horizontality and horizontal metropolis related to the Great Bay Area. Please feel free to start.
Well, maybe I can make a start. Thank you so much for taking me on board. I think this is really a fascinating project. I fully agree with the observation and also the inspiration to move away from the conventional vertical and hierarchical paradigm of urbanism. And you know, I have been working on urbanization in the Pearl River Delta regions for many years. and I certainly endorse that observation and also the inspiration to move into a direction that take the horizontality seriously in our, not only our understanding, our theorization of urbanism, but also in planning, in management, and even in architectural design. So I think that that is my first message. I very much enjoy the exhibition and also the very rich, insightful presentation that Paola has just presented. I learned a great deal. Perhaps in the interest of discussion, and I mean even dialogue, or even kind of different opinions coming together, so that we can move to a new height. I may raise perhaps several. I think that there are several issues that, at least from my point of view, I would find it interesting to get your feedback, because Paola, I mean, you have coordinated the project. You have got information from multiple sides, so probably you are in a much better position to address these questions that I have been trying to understand. From Hong Kong, from the Pearl River Delta region. All right. The first issue is that we're looking at a new form of settlements with different kind of people. So in the case of the Pearl River Delta region, I'm sure many of you understand that these happen to be a major destination of migrant population. You see, because the Pearl River Delta region happens to be better developed, right? So there are greater opportunities for employment. As a result, there are many people moving from interior China to come to the Delta region for employment. So what you have here is a mixture of different kind of people, people who are local and people who are from outside. So, in the case of Shenzhen, an overwhelming majority of people are from outside, from different parts of the country. And I'm sure many of you understand that even currently under the Chinese system, there is still a profound distinction between who are the local and who are the outsider. So if you imagine the horizontal metropolis developed in the Pearl River Delta region, you are facing a very interesting population with many different backgrounds and even many different rights and entitlement to the provision of services. So this raises an issue about how do we introduce a system that will take into consideration of people with different background and also with different rights and different entitlement. This is really a mixture of different kind of people. I mean, even for architectural design, for planning, for management, for the provision of services, how do we make sure that whatever we have come up with will be inclusive of different kind of people? I think that is the first challenge. Second, Paola, in your presentation, you mentioned the Greater Bay Area. And I'm sure, Andrea, you have been here, so you probably understand that this is one of the new concepts introduced by the central authority in China. So they would like to, perhaps follow the San Francisco Greater Bay Area, the New York Bay Area, the Tokyo Bay Area, and better integrate Hong Kong, Macau, and Guangdong together. So it's perhaps foreseeable that horizontal metropolis most likely will be the thing that will appear in the new Greater Bay Area here. Now, what make it challenging here is that you are looking at many different jurisdictions that have got their own institutional system. Now you have Hong Kong, you have Macau, now you have Shenzhen as a special economic zone, and you have Guangdong province, right? Then you have Guangzhou's municipality, and within Guangzhou, I think Angia, you are very well informed that you have Nansha. So I think that the second question is that it raised question about how do we deal with cross-jurisdictional coordination. Look, when we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about provision of services, if we take this as a horizontal metropolis, then very much it is rely upon an effective cross-jurisdictional coordination. So I think that is perhaps the second challenge that even as an academic or as planner, as a researcher or as a practitioner or even as an architect, that we really need to cope with this new challenge. Finally, I don't want to take too much time. I very much look forward to hearing from my colleagues. Finally, the emergence of horizontal metropolis also raised a new challenge, and that is how do we deal with the interest in the preservation of the old tradition in terms of culture, in terms of the history, in terms of the old way of life. In the past, if we go back to the 1950s and 1960s, if you come to the Pearl River Delta region, you will be presented with many the so-called people's communes. Yeah, people's communes. So in the countryside, although you have individual villages, but pretty much they are organized by the people's commune, where you have a comprehensive provision at the seat of the commune. Now, after market reform and opening up, many of these people's communes got replaced by town or township. So for instance, once again, Audrey, you have got a very good idea that if you go to Dongguang is a municipality to the north of Shenzhen, right? If you go to Dongguang, there are 36 towns. Previously, they were people's commune. So what you have is you have a transition of different culture, different lifestyle under different historical context. Now with urbanization, with the influx of ideology, and as I say, the influx of migrant population, new form of settlement and organization have emerged. And mind you, if you go to China today, you will also be fascinated by a great variety of architectural design. If you go to the city of Guangzhou, I can tell you that you can observe a great variety of postmodern architectural design. So I think that the last challenge that I now, from my own point of view, my standing point is that in our theoretical understanding, in planning, in architectural design, in management, how do we deal with the challenging issue of preservation of the tradition on the one hand, and accommodation of a great variety of new ideology, new culture, new way of life, and a new type of people. I think that is perhaps the last challenge. So Paola and Audrey, I think I better stop here so that I can hear the views from others. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, George. I think if Andrea, you agree that we should leave the space to the speakers, and eventually at the end I can comment on some questions. I think Kelly is ready for to be the second
please.
one.
Okay, I will try to jump in. I mean, I think I wouldn't presume to be able to answer any of the questions of Professor Lin, but maybe to add to points to the discussion, particularly from the perspective of some years or even some decades now work in Vietnam, particularly in the Mekong Delta, which I think shares many, well, being a delta, it shares many characteristics with the examples that Paola showed, particularly Venice, but also Pearl River Delta, certainly, and the Yangtze River Delta in China. But also the general notion of dispersed settlements, I think is incredibly prevalent from what we've seen in Vietnam. And mostly coming also from its cultural history, being a quagmire, being a big swamp that was drained. So the infrastructure was a water infrastructure. It was an infrastructure of kilometers and kilometers of canals and drainage systems. And then the urbanization, of course, followed the infrastructure and ended up everywhere, literally everywhere. So in the Vietnamese part of the Delta, it's an 18 million population of 18 million people, and literally dispersed, you could say almost quite evenly. Very few city centers. I mean, they came more with, you could say, the French colonial period, and then the Vietnamese government of having control in areas. But for me, what's interesting is maybe adding to understand the differences of different horizontal metropolis that we find around the world, and how the Asian, for me, it's an interesting issue to bring up different worldviews and a different understanding. Someone even, we know Carl Wittfogel, I don't know if he's included also, Paola, in your anthology, but this notion of the hydraulic civilization. So his understandings already that Asia in particular had a very strong way to build its territory and govern its territory through water management. And he was, I think, interesting. Of course, it's a very controversial hypothesis, even today, that he was playing with. But somehow saying that there was a certain degree of a possibility to govern, a possibility of what he even went as far to say was a despotism. So a very strong hand of how water management could work across territories and work across settlements, that had to do, and was accepted, his proposition, because of a worldview of Confucianism, a worldview of understanding things like feng shui. So it was you could say quite contrary to this enlightenment and the individualist notion, but still a deep-rooted having a place, a kind of human to human relations, but human to nature relations, that he credits back to the Confucian mindset. And what I think is interesting is other scholars since then as well have made, I think, an interesting leap of understanding how this, you could say, the horizontality, I think you could argue to a certain degree, requires a certain effort of collectivity and of maintenance by many people, because it's a very dispersed system of whether it's road or paths. So not coming from a strong. What I think is interesting about Wittfogel is he talked about this hydraulic civilization that came and required masses of the population to cooperate, to maintain, to work in conjunction with each other to keep this dispersed, productive agricultural system alive. But it came also with a kind of strong imposing control that I think, for me, understanding the advantage of working in a place like Vietnam is it has this strong, and I think China, it has this strong state. It has, you could say even to some degrees, too strong a state for certain aspects of life. But this ability to have the kind of imposed collective will, which I think is interesting as a way to resist. And for me, so maybe to wrap up, but for me, one of the biggest challenges to historic traditions and dispersed territories is the Western paradigm, or the paradigm in particular in Asia that's coming from things like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, that are imposing systems that are linear, that are not moving from a water-based territory to a road-based territory as an answer to progress, to modernity. So I think this, for me, the notion of horizontal metropolis, or many of the different iterations of what it could be called, are a way to, by strengthening that, it can also resist, I would say, the kind of powerful and dangerous moves of things like the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and the imposition of more centralized systems of control of the territory. So for me, the cultural aspect and the possibilities in Asia and what I've seen in Vietnam a little bit are really interesting as ways to also resist this kind of overwhelming neoliberal driven and kind of controlling and totalizing system, where there's still margins that come from culture and histories to have and to enhance this kind of dispersion and this horizontality. I stop there. I think it's not an answer to Professor Lin, but maybe adding elements into the points that were brought up.
One of the big disadvantages of the Zoom situation that the discussion really can't get going, because it becomes this kind of individual statement from everyone. So it's unfortunate that we can't all be present to try and tease out some of these very interesting ideas that are part of the exhibition. It's great to see the work again, Paola, from some of the workshop that I saw maybe 5-6 years ago, where some of these ideas were, of course, coming together with the student work in Lausanne, which is fascinating to see how it's stretched now across very different territories, and how you've begun to pull it together. And really the rigor of the approach I find really remarkable. So it's great to see, and I look forward to seeing the exhibition in person. I think what's fascinating for me as well is maybe some of the things that Kelly and George were alluding to, was this also the notion of what are these underpinning forces that are shaping the territory in a way, the economic, the political, some of the ideological, things that are beginning to shape that territory. But I also find it quite refreshing also that there seems to be a priority to look at the spatial characteristics of the place and the morphology that you find there, and to somehow delve into a kind of conceptualization of the horizontal landscape purely from looking at it spatially, and to pull out those unique characteristics. So in some way, my question would be, how important are those forces behind shaping of the territory? Or is it really more about working with the territory itself, working with the landscape morphologies, with the built morphologies that are found there, And of course, for me, when Peter Hasdell and I were looking at the border, the Hong Kong-Shenzhen border, and looking at conceptualizing the dynamics that we were witnessing there, which we really thought was about more of a kind of a synthetic ecology, that we tried to conceptualize it as a kind of dynamic space of exchange, a series of inputs and outputs between the dynamics created by the extreme differences in politics and economics between Hong Kong and Shenzhen that somehow began to influence the formation of the territory. And if anything, I would argue what we found was something that maybe isn't a horizontal metropolis, but actually is something about this kind of pervasiveness of these kind of enclave conditions, you know, these kind of pervasiveness of extreme difference in land occupation between wetlands and pieces of containers, between, you know, agricultural villages and much larger kind of infrastructures relating to logistics. So if anything, or even, you know, these kind of suburban developments that you get in Fairview Park. So for us, in a way, in our findings, it became less of the kind of horizontal dispersion, but more about these kind of extreme spatial pockets and enclave condition. So I'd be curious to know what your findings are in relation to that, or your position vis-a-vis, of course, Hong Kong versus some of the areas that you've been looking at in Hangzhou, etc. And I think my last point is really one coming at it as a designer. And I think what's fascinating in your work is the ability to you know, navigate what you find and what you see, and to draw what you see. Also the conceptualization. What I think is key to that is this lack of order and hierarchy. And I was wondering, as a designer, how do you design for that? You know, and this idea of control versus what cannot be controlled, and how much of that comes into your work in terms of thinking about the occupation and design of a territory. So I think for me, I'd like to come full circle and just say, well, you know, how much of this, you know, do you kind of pull into your work as approach to it as a designer itself, and how does that begin to influence you in terms of when you begin to alter and change and mark the territory for future transformation? But thank you very much.
Should I
Mathieu?
continue?
Wait.
Yes. Too many questions, maybe already, no? Okay, anyway. So
at the same time, Mathieu, it's the idea is that really to use this moment to exchange, and
right.
Nobody has answers, of course, but let's clarify maybe some could be very interesting also in respect to the conclusion of this month.
Right.
Maybe we can detect something to do next.
So I wrote down something maybe too long, so we'll just make it short and ask 2 questions or suggestions. But first, thank you very much, Andrea and Paola, for the invitation. Obviously, I'm very honored and also a bit terrified, because I'm not an urban planner or an architect. And so I really approached your work recently by reading the various books from the standpoint of a sociologist with an interest for urban planning, of course, but more for architects and urban planners themselves. So the question here will be, of course, a little bit abstract and meta, so to speak, but they have to do with first the politics of horizontality, and secondly with the epistemology of horizontality, maybe as a way to create a new understanding for urban interdisciplinarity in the urban project. So first, the politics of horizontality and the question of democracy in the horizontal metropolis. Of course, the horizontal metropolis raises many questions about the political organization, its institutions, its legal system, its model of governance, and so on. But George Lynn already addressed that when he mentioned challenges in cross-jurisdictional coordination. For my part, I had a question and a comment regarding the socio-political values that are promoted by the HM. Can I say HM? Okay. Of course, there's a vocabulary of the HM, a conceptual network of spatial concepts. But I see that each of these spatial concepts also brings up political principles, right? So with isotropy come the ideal of a fair distribution or fair redistribution, the value of equality, of autonomy of these isotropic fragments. Also the project of a spatial justice within this metropolis, spatial justice, which would not be reducible to isotropy, but also requires a sense of macro-territorial interdependence and solidarity. Then there is the notion of porosity, which brings up the political ideal of urban hospitality, of spaces capable to receive flows, but also receive newcomers, as George Lynn also raised earlier. So the porosity has its equivalent in hospitality, in inclusion, also maybe on a political level. Then, of course, horizontality, which literally implies the project of a non-hierarchical organization of the territory. Then you also, in other conferences or talks, stress the idea of the emancipation of the subject that such a configuration of the territory would foster. And of course, there is this sort of meta value of democracy, which would also requires a certain definition of citizenship, which would differ from the old sense of the metropolis in your own model. So, okay, many spatial concepts, also many political principles, so to speak. My question would be, are all these values compatible or compossible, as we say in French, compossible, as possible at the same time? And here, I guess that the oxymoric nature of the concept itself of horizontal metropolis maybe raises difficulties with regard to the consistency and of the socio-political model that the spatial model entails. So my question would be, are you interested as well in the development of the normative architecture, the architectonic of the political model, and not only the spatial model of the horizontal metropolis? Would you be interested in the development of a political theory of the horizontal metropolis, which would logically and systematically articulate these values, principles, or norms? And are you already maybe working on that? Because I watched this very fascinating debate or dialogue that you had with a Belgian political philosopher, Philippe Van Parijs, a while ago, a very fascinating interaction between an urbanist and a political philosopher. So I'm very interested in this sort of dynamics. And then the second point, the second question would be with regard horizontality as an epistemology for interdisciplinary urban research. This idea that horizontality does not offer only a new urban ecology, but maybe also a new ecology of mind, to quote, of course, Gregory Bateson's work. In other terms, the principles of the horizontal metropolis could inspire a theory of urban interdisciplinarity, a theory for an horizontal space of communication between various expertises, knowledges, and know-hows. And here, I guess that the three notions, the three core notions of horizontality, porosity, and isotropy could be applied to a theory of scientific communication and collaboration on urban issues or around the urban projects. Yeah, I'm not going to go into details, but and I'm not sure of what I have to say about that, but I guess there is something maybe to explore there. Thank you.
I don't know if Gianni and Andrea, you want to participate to this fantastic debate. For me, it's really interesting to listen to all of you, and I think that each one has put one fundamental question that should be addressed with the next research or new moment of exchange. But I don't know if Andrea and Gianni, you want to.
Yes, with pleasure. I can add a very short point, which perhaps brings some of the questions which are already addressed by the other panelists. Personally, my first interaction, if you want, with the concept of horizontal metropolis in Hong Kong was about the language itself and what we mean for horizontality, and especially in a city like Hong Kong, which is renewed to be opposite, if you want, to this. And then I found out that this concept is vehiculated politically and through the design. We have this concept of hierarchy in several documents in the region. So what makes me fascinated about horizontal metropolis in Hong Kong is based on two facts. One, if we look physically at the space, the project that we propose apparently seems to be a prototype for further development of a new radical idea of Hong Kong, which goes beyond the common and clearly stated mainstream idea of Hong Kong as a vertical city. But another one is really to start to approach the relation between politics and design. And in cases like the Paris Delta, to me, this relation between how politics has a special concept in mind and how this concept is transformed in the space through architect and designer seems to be very strong. And for example, when we think about the hardness of infrastructure in Paris Delta, and we think about the thinking of Giovanni Arrighi, we already see some interesting connection in that. And finally, to bring together a deeper understanding of culture, a deeper understanding of the space in its, let's say, a multiple way in which it's declined, we should perhaps start to extend the of ecology. And then mentioning perhaps the work of Caroline Merchant, when we think about radical ecology, this ecology which goes even beyond its direct association with biotics elements, with environment, but we can think about ecology and its influence, feminist discourse, how it influences differences in gender, and so on. So I think when we approach horizontal metropolis in Hong Kong and the Paris Delta, it becomes an opportunity to really start from the language first, then relation between politics and architecture, and third, how architects apply those into the space. And finally, how the ground, in fact, is truly capable of reformulating this sequence, if you want, top-down sequence on the space, how it counteracts this power. To understand this, perhaps ecology can be helpful answer. This is not really a question, but a set of points that I personally thought when I started with Gianni and the curator to think about horizontal metropolis in Hong Kong. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I don't have much to add. I actually would like to give the floor to you, Paola, to, in a way, to give some responses, or like to create a dialogue with all what has been already produced. So, and once more, we have a website and as well a physical exhibition, and I wish that many of those in Hong Kong can see it, because I believe there are a lot of more even knowledge that we gain from that. And about the case that we study in the Paris Delta and in Hong Kong itself, it is in a way a sort of prototypical development of a valley system within the Pearl River Delta, and put attention to those territories that in a way were left behind the overall planning and design of this region, because we have been very fascinated as well by the skyline that you see behind me, and all of us has been in a way focusing on that for quite a long time. But now the notion of the Greater Bay Area, as put forward by Professor George Ling, is in a way forcing also us to think more about Hong Kong as a centrality within a very large integrated metropolis. So please, Paola, sorry once more for taking
No, thank you, Gianni. But it's difficult to organize something that has a sense, but I try to go through the different aspects that I have been underlined. I would like to start from maybe from Mathieu, that is touching really the fundamental aspect of the political sense of this insistence on horizontality. That's also very interesting when you working on the ontology. Of course, you cross the anarchic thinking, you cross some socialist thinking, but at a certain moment, you can also cross kind of liberal thinking. For example, let's say from Kropotkin, you go to people like Jean Petitot, that is not a philosopher that has particularly, let's say, leftish side. So it's a very for me it's interesting also because, as Kelly was saying, we need to consider that we need maybe to be open to the co-presence of different ideologies, of different world visions. We cannot imagine that whatever hypothesis we bring needs to flattening all the differences that are in the different worldviews, expectations, political ideologies, etc. Now, how can we imagine that we bring hypotheses that needs in order to be implemented to get to a unique thinking? Now, I think that even intellectually, I don't want to imagine that. So I think that the horizontal metropolis has stronger roots in the anarchic thinking, but there is something of the liberal thinking that is interesting because it doesn't demolish the individual. So the individual is still there, although this individual is blind. No, in fact, and then we can recognize that many of the processes that have featured our territories were the result simply of interaction among blind individuals that didn't know exactly what was the general view, the overall. They were just into their small community, in their own small decisions, choices. And I think that this horizontality is also this. It's also that you don't have the overall view of everything. You cannot manage all the questions, and you accept that there is a level of blindness that is part of the construction and modification of the territory, and this is also strong in society. So at the same time, an emphasis on equity, on redistribution, etc., but also a kind of awareness that we will never be able not to organize everything, and we accepted that this blindness can have some interesting role to play. Of course, if we were only blind, I think that would be a tragedy, but we don't need to be always fully aware of everything. I mean, life is more uncertain than that. You cannot deal with everything. So I think that this ambiguity Mathieu, probably for some sociologists, this is too much, too ambiguous, etc. But I think that this ambiguity, on the contrary, is relevant, because otherwise we should go into kind of dogma, into kind of, I don't know what, but I'm not really interested in this, although I think that, as many other people here, we defend certain position. We defend the fact that design is part of a project, of a political project of emancipation. It's not part of a project of control only. Is trying to address also the possibility for the individuals to have a better condition. I don't want to renounce to this position, because I think that if we renounce to this, then we disappear as intellectuals, as we are not there anymore. We are totally unuseful. Maybe I go to Kelly. So the question, Kelly, of the this ambiguity between despotism and in the community, or the idea of the commons. I think that first of all, the horizontal metropolis, as I said before, is not an absolute. So the fully perfect horizontality is very difficult even to imagine. So we are always dealing with the tendencies, with the moments, with phases in which certain things are more important than others. But for example, also on the Venetian region, Piero Bevilacqua, this historian of the territory, he really emphasized not only the collective aspect of the water management, but the individual care. So I think that this could bring us to very contemporary themes about the importance of care. No? In fact, it was this water management, this diffuse water management, needs also individual care, not just communitarian care, not just institutional care, but also that the inhabitant has to do something outside of its plot just to maintain the system in good functioning. And I like this idea that the question of care is not inevitably bringing us into kind of small communities that care of themselves, but that is also touching at the level of the individual, that is brought to take a responsibility on what is doing. And I think that in the future, in our territories, we cannot rely, of course, only on these institutions. The ecological transition, for example, is asking not only for institutional and state, let's say, level projects, it's not only asking for communitarian projects, it's asking also for individual responsibility. So the point is, how do you convince the individual that there is something to do for him or for her in maintaining what is its space, and in that point it is really a cultural project. So say the horizontal metropolis is also something touching at the different cultures, and that should probably has to be declined in different or find a declination in the different contexts that goes through the different levels of power and of responsibilities. Coming back to Mathieu, of course, I would like to think about a political theory, but I don't think I can do this. So that this could really be the occasion for a series of conversations that we should organize, because I'm very interested to understand what, from the side of the political thinker, political scientists, etc., what reaction to this proposal that starts from space. So I go to Joshua. It starts from space. Of course, there is it's not a linear connection between what you can do in your practice and what you can experiment with the freedom of being an academic that can really explore until the end, let's say, or to the extreme, a certain hypothesis. And this is the luck we have of being also academic. We have to use, I think, first of all, we have to use this freedom. And I think that is, in any case, important that we make research that are tackling even gigantic questions, as we did in this case. But nevertheless, taking this freedom and bring questions to society, which are not so easy to be put in other cases. In my work, I try to remain coherent to this idea of horizontality and of porosity. I try to be coherent, which means that in any case, at any scale, in any situation, I try to bring those, say, guiding lines. So in some cases, I can push. In other cases, I'm less lucky. And in some cases, I accept the failure, because the failure is there. If I take the porous city of the Great Paris, I consider what we did a failure from the perspective of the concrete change, transformation of the city. In fact, it was exactly the opposite that was made. A big infrastructure, very selective, very exclusive, that has been superposed to the city, to the metropolis. The idea of new poles organized. So, I mean, the opposite of what we were proposing. So from the perspective of concrete intervention, I think it is a failure. From the perspective of the intellectual debate that it has opened, I think it is a success. So I think that I can live with that. I don't need that everything is a success. I think that ideas are very strong and they come out, even maybe not when you are there, maybe you go away and then some years after, you see that those ideas are circulating and are connecting to maybe other proposals. So let's say the coherency is not always possible, is not always easy, but I don't think that because of this we have to stop. And we have to take the risk. And nevertheless, I insist a lot. I'm quite tough in terms of, I'm stubborn more than tough. And I think that this is also part of the role we have. Even when we are professionals, we bring a discourse. That's why I started with the idea of the discourse. I think that to make a discourse is fundamental. If we want to act in the debate, in the public debate, we have to bring a discourse. We need to bring a new gaze. So we have to, because in some cases, you cannot convince on the basis of the discourse, because the discourse, as Mathieu was saying, there is always the risk that someone is interpreting in political, ideological terms. So they don't listen to you because they consider that what you are saying is not of their side. And then I think that you can insist on the gaze of bringing a different way to look at the normal reality. And this, in some cases, can open doors that are not immediately open, because people can understand that there is a knowledge of the territory. And sometimes you reveal something with your mappings. I mean, Kelly is very, I think, very agrees on this, because we do the same thing, but mapping reveals things that maybe people don't see. And then you can conquer their little bit of trust from their side that can make possible to touch also more, let's say, conceptual and also political questions. So I think, of course, is not the kind of unique thought, is not a dogma, is something that is there to be enriched and also controversed by the different context. About George Lin, dear George, the idea when we were in Shenzhen was that we could organize a workshop on the Great Bay Area. I think that the Great Bay Area as a topic, because Gianni showed some of the reflection, I think that if we imagine really to take the Great Bay Area as a subject for a process of horizontalization, of a horizontality that should be constructed, does not exist at all today. So this is really a project. And I think that would be fantastic if we can create conditions where we can take the time to reflect on this. And then I understand all the problems related to the organization of the settlements, the jurisdictional organization that we should eventually evolve. But I would not start from this. I would start from, how do people live here? How can we reflect on the disparities, the differences, the divarications that are in this area? how can we start from the potentials that this territory? There was a question, I think, from Joshua. Are you working with the territory, or are you working with the drivers? I start personally from the territory. Then, of course, I'm not ingenious. I know that there are drivers, economic, etc. But normally I try to start from what the territory is telling us. And then you can connect with the drivers, you can connect with the other aspect. But let's put for once the territory at the front. Let's consider the territory, the subject we are investigating, we are designing, is a subject. And I think we have to stress this subjectivity of the territory. And then the rest, is there, is operating, is changing, is transforming, but there is something there. It's not a flat surface. Now you have resistances. I was speaking of inertia. There are inertia that even if you go there with the big projects of a new harbor, and then you recognize things that are there since centuries that belongs to different eras. And I think that that's important. So the gaze and this putting the territory as a subject, I think is really changing our way of working, and also the connection with the economy. I believe very much in this moment to the relation between, let's say, territorial design, reading, and the economic thinking. But in any case, it should not be like in the past that economics arrives and then shapes everything. No, let's start this time from the territory and then the meeting point with the economical drivers. So personally, I start from the territory, not from the drivers. I don't know if this is making sense, but maybe for today is already a fantastic result to have had you with us. Really a gift. Thank to Kelly, to Matthew, Joshua, and George. For me, it has been a gift, and thanks to Gianni and Andrea for having made this possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. Thank you to all the panelists, and see you next week with a new session on radical ecology.
Yeah.